Good morning, folks, and welcome to the sixth meeting of the Referendum Scotland Bill Committee. Of one piece of item on the agenda just before we come to our witnesses, which is the issue of witness expenses, and making sure that my committee colleagues are content for me to have responsibility for arranging with the corporate body to pay any expenses under the appropriate rule. Okay, well, that small matter out of the way, let me very warmly welcome our witnesses this morning. It's great to see you here, and we're very grateful for you coming along to this committee to give us evidence on the franchise bill that's before the Scottish Parliament now. So thank you very much for coming along, and welcome to Andrew Deans, who's a MSYP, and Emily Shaw, the same, both from the Scottish Youth Parliament, Robin Parker, the President of the National Union of Students, and David McNeill, who's the Entitlements and Rewards Director. This is a great job, with Young Scott. And I understand no one wants to make a particular opening statement. That's grand, so we'll just bash on. Can I just start the proceedings in that case? We're just asking the very general question about the principles of the bill, because we need to establish evidence on the record of what people think of the principles of the bill, and extending the franchise for the referendum to 16 and 17-year-olds. Does anyone want to kick off on that? Robin, you're looking pretty keen there.
No, I'm happy to start off. I mean, first of all, to say NUS Scotland and alongside NUS UK for a very long time supported the principle of votes at 16. I think it's extremely positive that both the Scottish Government and the Westminster Government have been able to agree that this is something that we can do for this referendum. I think the principle of the fact that young people are going to have to deal with the consequences of the referendum, whichever way it goes, for the longest. That means we have the biggest stake in what happens with the decision. So the opportunity for young people to be involved in this, I think, is very, very positive.
Anybody else want to, Emily or Andrew or David, you want to chip in?
Yeah, if I could just say, the Scottish Youth Parliament has been campaigning for votes at 16 for over a decade, so it's something that we are really in favour of. I think it's fantastic to see the principle taken forward in the bill. 16, 17-year-olds can be just as informed as you're over 18s, and it's really important that they have a voice. So in terms of this, and we really welcome it. It was our 2009 national campaign, and we're members of the steering group of the Votes at 16 coalition, so it's something that we've been very involved in for quite a long time.
I'd just like to echo those comments that Young Scott really welcomes the bill and the opportunity for young people 16 and 17 to vote.
Can I ask Emily and Andrew, in terms of the position of the Youth Parliament, was that, is that a unanimous position? Was there a discussion about it? Where did the lie of the land go as far as that's concerned?
Sure. Well, in terms of campaigning, both times that it was selected as a national campaign in 2009 and also in 2011 again, and both those times were by MSYPs choosing that as a campaign. But it also features in our Change the Picture manifesto, which was the result of a big consultation with young people. We got 42,804 responses to that consultation, and that was from young people telling us that it was A, one of their key issues, and B, that they were very much in support of it. So it does have the backing of young people, I think.
Anybody else want to, Tavish?
If I could ask our young MSPs in the future what they envisage in terms of participation. Do you think the Youth Parliament's role in the next year or so will be about encouraging participation? If so, how do you think the Youth Parliament will do that?
I think what is the most important thing for us is that everybody needs to be getting behind encouraging 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. I think that it's very much going to be several different groups and several different organisations kind of encouraging 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. The Scottish Youth Parliament would love to be as involved as possible, and I think that we've got a couple of propositions about the wording of kind of the information that's going to go out and things like that to make it kind of youth-friendly. So I think in terms of that, it's something that we would love to see considered.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely necessary that there's got to be some sort of awareness raising about this. I'm sure awareness will be fairly high when we get to sort of near the referendum amongst young people and amongst the rest of society generally. But I do think there is a it's necessary for us to make sure that clear, impartial information is going out to young people about how they can register, that they have the right to even vote in the first place, and also about how they can go along and vote and things like that. I think we have a role to play in that. I think the other bodies here have a role to play in that, and I think the campaigns and the Scottish Government have a role in just making sure that there's clear, accessible, plain English information that's going out to young people and just raising awareness of their right to participate in this and how they can go about doing that.
And do you know if, it may be too early yet, but do you know if the Electoral Commission and these bodies who are there to ensure this, the whole principle of participation is encouraged, have asked the Youth Parliament or indeed the NUS and Young Scot about helping with that yet? Or is it maybe a little bit early to have that in place?
We've certainly been in discussion with the Electoral Commission already, and we're agreed that we're going to carry on talking to each other. I think this idea of a well-resourced registration and information campaign, I think, is going to be really crucial. I think there is a lot of work for all of us to do between now and the referendum, and particularly with young people, but actually across the board in terms of providing impartial, independent information, and making sure that we take 16 and 17-year-olds in particular through the registration process.
Thank you.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to kind of take it back just a step for a moment. Also, the question has been posed regarding the support for voting at 16. But in terms of the individual organisations that you represent, was there much of a debate or much of a campaign against voting at 16 and 17?
I mean, it's a while since there's been a series of debates at conferences, both in Scotland and the UK, about the vote to 16 issue. And I mean, you know, there are some people who are against it, but the overwhelming majority in all stages have indeed been in favour of this issue and in favour of taking it forward. And actually, I think it's really positive that NUS at UK level played a very strong role with the rest of the Votes at 16 coalition and organisations like the British Youth Council in the run-up to the Westminster Parliament taking a vote on the Votes at 16 issue. And we really welcome that the Westminster Parliament has now voted in favour of the principle of votes at 16. And anything any of you as politicians can do with your UK colleagues in terms of encouraging them to keep the wheels in motion with the issue would be very welcomed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Nothing ever, I don't think, gets unanimous support in the Youth Parliament, just like any other parliament. It's difficult to quite command 100%, but I think as far as issues go, votes at 16 is one of the less controversial ones. I think amongst young people, there really is the feeling that that's the appropriate age for the franchise, and that given that we work with 16, 17-year-olds all the time, we can see that they're very much ready to vote. And I think the Coalition for Votes at 16 shows that there is a broad support amongst youth organisations across the country for this.
And certainly from a Young Scot perspective, we don't take positions on issues. We're very much about encouraging and supporting young people to have their own views. But votes at 16 is one issue that we as an organisation have been kind of willing to support, because the other organisations and the feedback from young people is that it's such an important issue. So
just to recap, overwhelming majority, less controversial, and certainly it's encouraging that young people actually want to do this. And that's very helpful.
Sure. Thank you. Linda, you want to go into wider awareness issues?
Aye, and I think I'd like a specific question to Robin first. Can put Robin on the spot. It was just, Robin, in your initial submission to the committee, you expressed some concern about, you know, in fact, I can tell you what it is. It's on page 2, and it was about what you considered at that time might just be a partial extension of the franchise, and we had to be very, very aware of that. Now that you've followed the process through and we're at where we're at, can I ask how you feel that's been addressed?
In terms of the proposal that's on the table, I think we think as far as possible that this provides a solution. I think we were particularly concerned about a previous suggestion around the use of attainers. The attainers approach, which I think is mentioned in the SPICE briefing as an alternative approach, and so I think this is certainly a better approach than that. And I think the only thing that really needs to come now is this creates the opportunity for everyone to register as a 16 and 17-year-old. It just has to be turned into a reality through the kind of the awareness raising and through supporting people through the registration process.
thanks. But in the awareness raising, I would just like to hear all your views on how best to move forward in terms of raising that awareness, because we've all got responsibilities in that. The practical things that could be done to assure awareness of registration, but also, I suppose, when you get further than that, is, I suppose the word would be encouraging people to actually use that franchise and use their vote. How would you see that happening in your respective organisations? And how do you best reach those who are maybe not aware of the Youth Parliament, or who are not a student, or who don't even tap into the Young Scot services?
I think from the Young Scot perspective, we have, there's around 500,000 young people in Scotland that are Young Scot National Entitlement Card holders, and it's around 80% of the population that are 13, 14, 15 that were likely to be eligible to vote. And we have a range of communication channels, direct to card holders, magazines with a kind of very high reach. So it will be across all our communications channels with young people, reinforcing the message, first of all, to get registered to vote, and kind of secondly, to actually use that right to vote in the referendum.
From our point of view, a few things that we'd like to see. I think that first of all, the kind of setting up of some organisation, coalition, unit, whatever it will be that can deliver this from an independent point of view. I think that's very important. Some other specific things that I think would be important. I think clearly clear guidance to schools would be something that is very important around how this would work and so on. I think it's important that people can have the opportunity to ask questions to the campaigns and to politicians, but I think we wouldn't want to see a kind of really strong sort of open door campaign into schools approach. Some other things that we're really keen on, I think a kind of really peer kind of led approach to this kind of thing is going to be crucial. So giving young people the opportunity to do that kind of peer-to-peer education at a school level and in other educational organisations, I think is very important. Along similar lines, kind of clear guidance for charities, in particular for student associations around what they can and can't do around the referendum, I think would be very welcome. And something else I just want to pick up on was around, we'd be quite keen on the idea of, I think one of the things that I think everyone seems pretty clear in a view on is that this is going to be something that has a very high turnout, particularly in comparison to some recent elections. And I think, therefore, there's an importance on the Parliament, on the government, to make sure that electoral registration officers have enough resource and have enough polling stations. I think at the 2010 election there were situations where students were left queuing for a very long time to vote, and if there is going to be a high turnout, we don't want to see that kind of situation repeated. In particular, I think polling stations in kind of community locations, in particular in universities and colleges, is something we're very interested in. I think particularly at a university level where you've perhaps got 17-year-olds going away to university, staying in university halls, kind of having polling station within the halls of residence, within the university buildings near those kind of things, really important.
In terms of practical awareness raising, I mean, we reached for over 42,000 young people with just our consultation. So I think it is possible to do that, looking at social media, engagement with youth clubs, schools. In terms of schools, yeah, I just want to pick up on what was said about clear guidance. I think that's really important. We need to ensure that this is something that isn't just restricted to modern studies classes. Information needs to be distributed all across the school. Another idea that we would really like some clarification on, perhaps, is the rolling registration forms. Ideally, we would like to see those distributed, taken into schools and youth clubs and other venues like that. I think that would be a fantastic way to kind of practically engage them in how they can actually register. But of course, that's something we would kind of be looking to you guys to clarify a little bit.
Thanks for that, Emily. I think some of my colleagues are intending to pick up some of these points. Yes, Andrew.
Just a little one that I think there's definitely an opportunity when we're thinking about raising awareness and raising engagement. One of the things that we hear a lot from young people is that democracy and citizenship education in schools is varied across the country. In some cases people say it's very, very good, and in some places people say it's really not as good. There's not subject specialists teaching it and things like that. And I think probably the referendum, and given that young people and the 14 and 15-year-olds now are going to have the opportunity to vote, it's a chance for us to look at that and look at where we can improve on democracy and citizenship education and use that to equip young voters when they go ahead and make their decision.
Annabelle, yours another awareness-raising area as well.
Yes, a bit of. Yes. Good morning. You all look very young to me. But you don't look so young that you're still at school, and I'm interested in the point you were making, Emily, about awareness, and I fully understand the importance of that. At the same time, people at school are going to be preoccupied with important issues, particularly during the months of April, May and June of next year. Do you think a balance has to be struck about trying to give information to young people in schools and yet not distracting them from what they're actually trying to achieve within the school?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's something, at the moment there's already time set aside for PSE lessons, for example. I think that time like that could be used more effectively in quite a lot of schools, so I think that's something to look at. And it's also kind of coming back to what I said about maybe providing materials online. I think that the internet is maybe underestimated slightly. I mean, so many young people have access to it all across the country. So I think that there is a balance between, schoolwork being done in school, but at the same time, this is potentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for young people to have their say on the future of Scotland. So I think that although schoolwork is important, there is, as you say, a balance to be struck.
Can I just make a kind of a broader comment, really about how I feel the kind of purpose of education is, and I suppose for me the purpose of education at all levels is about setting people up to be successful citizens of the country in the widest sense, and I think that very much includes things like voting. So I suppose what I'm saying is that education and the kind of thing we're talking about here, I think, go hand in hand. They're very much the same thing.
Look at to pass exams.
Sure, but I think, and there is clearly a need for some balance, but there's a strong synthesis between them, is what I think I'm saying. And I think some of the points around modern studies and the way in which things are taught, I think often the things that have engaged certainly me as a student most have been when it's been made very real. It's been made directly connected to the real world and the things that are happening around us. And I think there's no better opportunity in many subjects just now to make that connection when we're having such a discussion about what the future of Scotland is going to be. And wherever people sit on the Constitution, there's an opportunity to tie it into a wider discussion about the future of Scotland, I think.
Patrick next, and then I'll come to Rob Gibson.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm a really strong supporter of the principle of votes at 16, but as NUS noted in the written evidence, we've heard from Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man who've all reduced their voting age to 16, and they've had very different results. It seems to me that if we do this and we get 10% of 16 and 17-year-olds voting, it will actually harm the argument for extending the right to vote at 16 to all elections, and it would be worse than not trying. The objective surely has to be to get a really good, strong turnout, not only to advance the argument for votes at 16 for other elections, but also to build a strong habit of voting for those young people who will then be 18, 19, 20 and be voting in subsequent elections. You've all said that you want to see clear guidance about what schools can do, but it seems to me that the differences between those jurisdictions that we heard about what activity actually happened where young people are seems to be part of the reason they got different results. Beyond just saying there should be clear guidance, what should it say? What do you feel is appropriate activity to be taking place in schools, and what would be crossing the line into something that's inappropriate? And remembering, of course, that some 16 and 17-year-olds will themselves be campaigners and activists and will be motivated by the referendum, we hope, on both sides.
I think the kinds of things that I'd like to see on a strong scale would be making it part of lessons, and making it clear in what way that can be done as part of lessons. I think things around, again, go back to the kind of peer approach, so opportunities to teach-ins, pupils to be, or students to be teaching each other around the issues. I think those kinds of things would be really good. I think there is I think one of the previous things that has been found is around the role that politicians play. I think there needs to be opportunities to ask politicians questions, and particularly ask the campaigns. I think more importantly than politicians. But I think the peer-led approach I think has to be the kind of fundamental basis for it. But I think it's as much about what we found. I think is hesitations from schools because there isn't clear things there. Schools might like to do things, might not like to do things, but they're just, there's a bit of uncertainty, and that leads them to hold back from things that I think all of us around the table would agree would be great.
And that's already the case. Some schools have a really good habit of doing Q&A panels or mock hustings, and other schools seem to think that they're not actually allowed to do that. So, do you think that should be an expectation of local authorities, that they provide that kind of activity in schools?
I mean, certainly one of the things that we echoed in our written evidence was around extending a duty to the Society of Local Authority Lawyers and Administrators to promote the referendum to 16 and 17-year-olds. And I think to go back to the fundamental point at the start of your question, I think if there is a low turnout from 16 and 17-year-olds in the referendum, it won't be because of a lack of interest in the issue. It won't be because 16 and 17-year-olds don't want to vote. It will have been because we've all failed in terms of providing them the information, providing them with the awareness and the ability to vote.
Anyone else?
Just in terms of the difference in participation, there's an interesting comparison, I suppose, with the Scottish Youth Parliament elections that are currently going on. We are supporting the Scottish Youth Parliament with online voting for around half of the local authorities in Scotland just now. And the evidence from the current elections that are going on just now and the elections in 2011, where we used e-voting as well, is that it's the crucially important of the work that goes on in local authorities, and particularly in schools, in creating a buzz around the election, making young people understand the importance of voting, and participation goes up to 90% in some schools, and in other areas it's less than 5%, where people are perhaps just expected to do it without any kind of encouragement or support. And interestingly, it doesn't matter the mechanism, online or offline voting doesn't make as big a difference as it's only 5% really of the process. 95% is the work that goes into in schools and community learning and development of encouraging that turnout and the importance of exercising their right to vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think just on that point, I mean, I think the good thing about this is there will already be that buzz. That buzz is going to be there, and it's just about making sure that young people have equal access, I think, to all points of view. It's about balancing that, not wanting to scare off schools from doing these kind of activities, but also that desire to have equal access and just make sure that it's fair. But I definitely think that schools and local authorities should be very much encouraged to have those sort of events, the Q&As, the debates and whatever, just as long as they're always mindful of ensuring equal access. And I think as long as they are ensuring equal access, then it can only be a good thing that young people are being engaged by the campaigns, getting the opportunity to ask their questions and getting the opportunity to really think about the issues.
I wouldn't suggest this as an amendment to the bill. I'm not sure it should be on the face of the bill, but would you agree with the idea that the government, local authorities, schools, all of us, political parties and the campaigns as well, should commit in principle to an aspirational target that we get at least 50% of 16 and 17-year-olds voting in the referendum? That would be higher than 18, 19, 20-year-olds turnout in most elections. Should we set that as an aspirational goal?
One I'm happy to have a think about, definitely.
Okay.
I think if I could just jump in, I think for me, the issue isn't, I mean, we believe that actually, whatever the turnout is, the fact that 16 and 17-year-olds are going to be able to vote is the real success. I don't think that turnout should be used as a gauge of whether this is a failure or a success. I think that actually we've already won in the fact that they can vote. There is stuff to be said for facilitating the vote and registration, but I don't think that we should be measuring the success of this on how many 16 and 17-year-olds we get to actually turn out.
As you're thinking a bit more about it as well, I think there'd be quite a strong argument for saying that the fundamental principle is not just about 16 and 17-year-olds, that there should be a really big commitment around having a really strong turnout right across the board for people of all ages. And I think that will only benefit all sides of the debate.
Thank you.
going to come to Robin, then Linda.
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, is it a specific one?
It was specifically
Sorry, let me ask Rob first.
something that Robin... sorry, Rob.
Rob, let me first of all, are you going to widen this out, Rob, or is it still in the awareness issue?
Still looking at the schools situation.
Okay.
Yes,
First one, Rob, then I'll come
Thank you, convener. Morning, panel. You know, in your experience, how well have schools developed materials for teaching about the developments of the politics of Scotland and Britain at the moment in PSE and modern studies, given that you said that there's an uneven spread of delivery across the country?
It's an uneven spread. You can't possibly say that there's one set standard. I know that I've been to several schools across Scotland. Some schools have taught modern studies, some haven't. Some have made up for that lack of availability of modern studies with good PSE lessons, for example. It's not very often that you hear about anybody kind of raving about the political education that they've received out with modern studies. It's probably the general comment I would make, but we can't really set a standard.
Anyone else?
I need to say, I think around this is a particular. I think there's really positive comments there around the kind of the broad spread of political education, modern studies, and so on in schools and wider than that. I think if we had this kind of registration information campaign or whatever it will be that could produce this for specifically for the independence referendum around a range of issues, around a range of areas of study, then that would only be a good thing. And if this was sufficiently independent, and I think it's very important, it's completely independent, then these people would be able to produce that.
Just a little follow-up on that, convener. Do you think that the education services in each council area should ensure that there's balanced teaching materials available for modern studies and PSE in every secondary school on this issue?
Yes.
Well, that's important because it means there's got to be a lot of work done, presumably. Although obviously modern studies develops in a fashion, convener, where local issues may well dictate how teachers deal with particular things. But in order to get a balance where there isn't at the present time a lot of information, do you think it's essential that we make sure that the education services know this?
Yeah, I would say yeah, and I also think that there's something to be said for working in partnership with organisations like ourselves at both campaigns for either side of the debate and your elected representatives as well. I think it's a collective responsibility, but in principle, yeah.
Yeah, it was just a quick one. When Robin was talking, it set me thinking a wee bit. What Robin kept saying was, invite in politicians. We hear this all the time, but it certainly strikes me for the referendum that it's not actually all about politicians, because there's many people on both sides of the argument in the Yes campaign and the Better Together campaign who are not politicians, come from all different walks of life. And I wondered if it strikes you as important that should be made very plain in any kind of guidance that is put out, so that education authorities, schools don't feel they are being politically pressured at all. This is a people's campaign. It's not necessarily a politician's campaign. Can I have your views on that?
I think, bearing in mind the current audience I'm speaking to, I think one of the experiences previously elsewhere has been that politicians may not be best placed in terms of doing some of this, and I think therefore I'd really emphasise the peer thing. I think that when it's young people talking to other young people, that's going to be what's most effective.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, you've got student representative councils, you've got local youth councils. I think also youth work services are extremely important as well. There isn't just your politicians to turn to. So.
Supplementary here as well.
Convener, I just want to be clear that there's a difference, and ask you to think about this and comment on it. There's a difference between the provision of information and interfering with teaching. And that's, I'm not encouraging you to agree with the proposition that we should interfere with teaching at a local level, because on the referendum, for example, in my part of the world, Emily, there'll be views on oil, which will be rather different from both national campaigns. And would you agree that there's a very important distinction between the might of the state coming in on top of this issue, as opposed to the provision of information provided to... see how they all react to it? You see my point? That's how they all react to it, and that's what's going to go on. I'm not for the politicisation of this debate in our classrooms, and therefore people should have information that allows them, as Robin, as you rightly say, to participate in the debate and to participate and be good citizens because they can for the future, but not to have information provided which is clearly political. It's up to people to make up their own minds, and we shouldn't be interfering with teachers and how they teach in our classrooms. Do you agree?
I think in general that's the best approach to teaching.
Thank you.
Teaching isn't somehow kind of brainwashing. It's a
no, exactly.
It's a facilitation of education. That's what teaching is. And so I think I'm not. And actually, in my vast experience, young people are more than capable of pulling up people of all kinds when they see through information that they don't agree with. They will take on debates and have it. So I think what I'd really emphasise is this: when I'm talking about an independent organisation or campaign or whatever that's going to do this, it needs to be independent from the political scene in terms of politicians as well as from government, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, from government as well, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I think we now have Annabel Ewing, and then I think Patricia wants to ask a question as well.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I have 2 quick points, but just picking up on the discussion that we just had there. I mean, it has to be said that at the moment, there is debate in schools. I was at a school last Friday. People go into schools. That's the case in so-called peacetime, and it's also the case during election campaigns, and that all has managed reasonably well, I think, to date, and there's been no major concerns about that. I'm sure all of us around the table have participated in that, including Mr. Scott. But the 2 points I had, one was picking up on the technical side of things in terms of communication. And I'm perhaps not the best person to ask this question. I think some of my colleagues would regard me as a bit of a Luddite. But it occurs to me that perhaps, one way of using latest technology would be to have perhaps an IndieRef registration information app. And I just wonder if that kind of thing would be helpful to raise awareness of registration.
Yeah, fantastic. That would be brilliant. Yeah. I think that would be brilliant. I know that my university just got an app for our Blackboard service, and yeah, it's fantastic. So.
I mean, there's the bigger point, and I know that there's the talk in the bill here around the household canvas. And we've were discussing just before we came in with colleagues from the Scottish Youth Parliament about whether or not individual registration would be more empowering. It would give more young people ownership of the kind of process. So I think it is worth exploring whether or not some kind of online, registration, encouraging young people to register for themselves rather than leaving up to the household is possible. And I think doing that online is the way that young people engage and older people too. So it would be worth exploring.
Okay.
Just to pick up on that, rather not so much in terms of answering the question, but just at the moment, the Westminster government is bringing forward proposals that would quite radically alter the voter registration process that are likely to be very immediately before this referendum takes place. And we would like to see the Westminster government delay those moves for some time to give so that the two don't become conflated and become a bit of a mess. And we'd be happy to work with either the committee as a whole or members of the committee to lobby the Westminster government on that issue.
We are very acutely aware of taking a fair bit of evidence in that area already, and we're hopeful that a sensible solution can be arrived at. And we're watching very carefully the negotiations that are currently going on between the Scottish Government and the UK Government. So if it doesn't go as well as we think, we may come back looking for your help.
Sorry, I just had one other
point
following up on the discussion thus far this morning. And it goes back to the first part of the discussion concerning the principle. And it occurs to me that a question that might be worth asking you guys is, some would take the view, well, if you can't lower the voting age for all elections, then there's no point doing it for this particular referendum. So if it's not for all, don't have it just for one. What would your response to that kind of argument be?
Well, we'd very much like to see votes at 16 happen for all elections across the UK. Indeed, I think there is even discussions taking place at a European level about votes at 16. I think there's a... Well, I would also draw attention again to the Westminster Government has now voted in favour of this as an issue. And we'd very much like the Westminster Government to take further steps towards implementing this at a UK-wide level. But I think in terms of answering the question, I think there's a strong answer for this being, I think, recognised by everyone as being such an important topic and such a one-off opportunity to discuss this issue and set out what Scotland's future will be. Therefore, I think this is a reasonable place to start, but I think I would very much like a commitment from all politicians of all parties that this is only a starting point and it will then come for everywhere else.
James, I think we're going to slightly change tack a bit and get into more about registration issues, I think.
Right, okay. Convener, I mean, we've had quite a wide-ranging discussion and we've covered quite a lot of the issues around registration. I think registration is very important because if we're going to get participation in the referendum, people have got to be registered in the first place. And you've all given some really good practical examples of how you can improve registration. You know, David spoke about his contacts in Young Scot, Robin in the student community, and Emily spoke about, you know, getting the forms out into, you know, youth clubs and youth organisations, and also we discussed the IndieRef app. In terms of actually making that happen on the ground, do you then support, you know, a strong role for the Electoral Commission and individual local authorities with proper resources behind them to provide you, you know, with the guidance and the material and work closely with yourselves in order to provide you guys with the techniques and the resources to roll the registration methods out across the youth community?
I think the in our evidence, the subheading that's towards the end, I think the key phrase in there is well-resourced. This has to be well-resourced, otherwise we won't be giving we won't be turning the opportunity into the ability for 16 and 17-year-olds to vote.
And assuming also you know you're looking for, you know, strong leadership and good guidance in terms of, you know, rolling these techniques out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think making it very clear where responsibility lies here, and I think that's why we support around the extending the duty to the local authority administrators around them having a duty in this area. I think making it clear that there's going to be somebody or some coalition of organisations who have a responsibility for doing this. I think those things will help deliver that kind of independent leadership if they have the resources to do so.
And from a Young Scot perspective, we would be keen to support in any way the kind of registration process, whether it is simply communicating to young people what the process is agreed, or potentially looking at bringing the expertise that ourselves have got in our partners in the improvement service around registering young people for the Young Scot National Entitlement Card and online registration. We've got there's a considerable public sector asset in there in terms of that expertise, and whether or not we could bring some of that to the registration and an app, if it's possible.
Okay, right, I've got a specific question for. Sorry, is there anything?
Yeah. Well, it's a couple of things. The first thing is that I'm echoing what these guys have said about, you know, we want to see some leadership from local authorities in really making this, I think, a priority, is making sure that young people are able to register and know how they're supposed to do that. I want to touch on one of the things that David mentioned about, we were having this discussion about the household canvass against rolling registration. Now, it appears to me that at the moment the mindset is that household canvass would be the main way of doing this, and that rolling registration would be a sort of secondary and kind of mop-up way. There are advantages to that, but also disadvantages, in that we know that attainers are often missed out on the household canvass when it comes around to electoral registration. Parents sometimes just don't particularly recognise that they can put them on or anything like that, and young people often don't know about this process even happening. We do see an advantage in putting a little bit more emphasis on the rolling registration, especially when it comes to 16 and 17-year-olds. I think if you can get those rolling registration forms out into schools, if you can make sure that schools are taking on a bit of responsibility for just making sure that people are registered, then you might well solve a lot of the problems that you could have with the household canvas and people getting missed off of it. We, ourselves, I guess, and also thinking about that, would like a bit of clarity on what's going to happen if people register on the wrong register, or there's duplicate registration. You know, they get put on the household canvas, but we would like to give the message to the young people we meet: if you're in doubt about whether you're registered or not, fill in one of these rolling registration forms and make sure you are. But at the same time, we don't want people to be penalised for unknowingly registering twice. So I think there's a bit of clarification that would be good on that point. And another point, which is just about the information. It was looking at the proposed household canvas form for the Register of Young Voters. The references are all to age. They're all to if a person living at this address is 15 but will be 16 by. Now, in our mind, it would be easier to use dates of birth for this. I think if you look at this, you know, it says, enter the names of 15-year-olds living here who will be 16 by this date. That might depend on when somebody gets round to doing the household canvas. If this is after the 1st of December and a 16-year-old has had a birthday since the 1st of December, they should be on the Register of Young Voters. This might give the impression that they shouldn't actually be on that. If you do the dates of birth, anyone born between here and here, it just makes it a little bit clearer who's supposed to be on what register, because it can be quite confusing. You know, we had to, when the proposals first came out, we had to look through it a number of times just to get straight in our heads who's supposed to be sort of registered where. So I just think thinking about those kind of things and trying to make this as clear as possible for the parents who are doing household canvas, and also thinking about the role that rolling registration can play, especially when we've got so many young people in places that we know that we can get to them in that way.
Just briefly on rolling registration, I think student associations even have had mixed experience in the past. Some electoral registration officers have been very happy, very keen, very enthusiastic to come and hold rolling registration events on university campuses and college campuses. Others have felt a bit unsure about whether they should be doing that or not, around what their responsibilities were. And I'm not sure if that's a resource issue, if that's a guidance issue. But I think, as Andrew said, I think making really strong encouragement and support to EROs to come down and have rolling registration events in schools, colleges, universities, really, really positive.
Stuart, I think you're a supplementary on this, and I'll come back to James.
Thank you very much, Convener. Specifically, I mean, I know David touched on it earlier, but Andrew's gone into it in some detail now. But I just wondered if the panel had any concerns or could express their views on the issue of household registration, particularly in regard to effectively households, adults who may decide that they just don't want to register, they throw the form away, or yet there are young people there who would want to register, and how we deal with that. And also those who just make a mistake, as you mentioned, Andrew, don't put people on the form, put them on the wrong form, etc. Although I don't think there's the problem with double registration. As long as you don't vote twice, that's the main thing. But I just wondered if the panel could express their views on this issue about how we ensure that those who are 16 and 17, irrespective of the views of adults in the household, get on the register. Can I start with, I don't know, Andrew, you've kind of given your views, but I don't know if you want to add anything then.
Just really what I said before, I think it's, you know, there are always going to be sort of mistakes, and adults who aren't interested in registering when the young people are, or who just miss out. It happens with attainers all the time. You know, people just don't realise that's what they're supposed to be doing, that they can actually put young people on it. I really do think that the answer to that is putting a little bit more emphasis on rolling registration. It works particularly well for 16 and 17-year-olds, where we know that the majority of them are in schools or colleges or engaged with youth work services or things like that. I think there's a huge opportunity to, and it is empowering as well. It's about, there's a dual responsibility then on parents to the household thing, but also a responsibility on young people and a responsibility on those engaging with young people to just make sure that way. And if the double registration isn't a problem, then that makes it all the better. We can put out that message that says, if you are in doubt about whether you're registered or not, make sure you are, so that we don't run into those kind of problems. But I think rolling registration and using that to its full advantage is a really good way of making sure that 16, 17-year-olds will be registered.
The time I've seen rolling registration at its best was the two people that came down from the electoral registration office. I think they literally basically brought the register, and people were able to go up to them and say, well, I'm not sure if I'm registered or not. Flick through, oh, you're on here, it's fine, or fill this form in and send it back to us, or give it to us just now, get sorted.
Again, just to echo the comments of Andrew, is really placing the kind of responsibility on the young person to be registered may give them a kind of greater sense of ownership of the kind of process, and may lead, there's no evidence around this, but may lead to a higher level of participation rather than just a polling card appearing through their door.
Very, very short follow-up. Yeah, do you envisage then, just in practical terms, that the initial registration would be go ahead roughly as planned, household registration, and then there'd be some sort of follow-up campaign, if you want to put it that way, of rolling registration, going out and trying to engage in the way that you mentioned, Robin, for example, and trying to, I feel like a mop-up exercise, trying to ensure that as many people as possible can ensure that they are on the register. Is that how you would envisage it working?
I think it's that kind of thing. I think I think as Andrew said, it needs to not be thought of as a mop-up. It needs to be thought of as quite a serious, strong exercise.
I'd quite like to ask young people the question of how they feel about their being registered as part of their household, or being registered as or taking the responsibility for themselves to register. It would be an interesting to find out what the answer would be.
Yeah, that applies to us all, though. I mean, yeah. Currently household registered as a household, even those of us who are over 16.
A few years.
By a year or two.
Come back to James.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think there were some really excellent, practical points there that we got in evidence, and thanks a lot for that. As well as the importance of registration, it's important that people are obviously registered in the correct place, and I think one of the challenges, particularly in relation to students, if the poll takes place in autumn 2014, it's going to be early in the college, university year, and you may have, for example, a situation where someone is a 16-year-old has stayed all their life in Cambuslang, might have registered in Cambuslang, but goes to St Andrews University in September 2014. What can be done to ensure that we don't have blocks of students and young 16 and 17-year-olds who end up disenfranchised because the place that they've gone for their education is different from where they're registered?
Well, first of all, there's something I think is an incredibly important thing that we have as a right as students, which is to be registered in both a term time address and a home address. And so that helps with this issue. But I think what it emphasises is, first of all, a positive aspect in terms of delaying the move away from the move to individual registration by the Westminster government. One of the advantages of household registration for students is that allows university halls of residence to block register everyone who stays in that university halls of residence. And I think, as you've said, there would be a very, very, very important timing issue here in terms of the urgency of doing that. And so there's a way to do this. But if I suppose that this is most important in terms of this is me thinking out loud. Students could still well be able to vote and using in your particular example of Cambuslang to St Andrews, so long as they'd been registered and we'd done that effectively whilst they were still in school in Cambuslang, then they'd be able to postal vote in Cambuslang. So that's also a way to do it. And I think that emphasises getting the registration right at home a long time in advance as well.
Yeah, I suppose what you're, in practical terms, what you're saying is that if individual registration is delayed, then come September 2014, student halls of residence, working with the electoral registration officers, would be able to get the bulk of first-time students registered, where they're being educated, and that would overcome the problem. And if that was followed up by, if some people had been picked up in that exercise by making people aware of, postal votes, so that they could ensure if they were still registered in Cambuslang, they could register, they could pick up their vote that way.
I think it also, just to say, it's something we'd be very happy to keep. I think it highlights an issue that clearly we're going to have to work very closely with the Electoral Commission and EROs on. So we'd be happy to do that.
Trisha?
Good morning. I think I'm right in saying, and this certainly used to happen, it may not still happen, but the ERO in Glasgow used to automatically register all students coming into the city, staying in halls of residence as a matter of course. Do you think that's something that perhaps, if Glasgow doesn't any longer do it, they should reconsider doing again, and that other local authorities should perhaps consider a similar way of working?
Yeah, I think that would be using the block registration methodology with working with universities to get a register of everyone who's staying in that halls of residence and block registering them.
Mm. And it also occurs to me that there will be a lot, potentially, of young people who are just starting their first term at university and who will have been registered at home but will have now moved somewhere else. And James's example of Cambuslang to St Andrews is probably as good as any. And in that first term, between them arriving at university and the actual referendum taking place, we don't know exactly when the referendum will be, but it will clearly be a very short space of time, and there'll be a lot going on in their lives at that particular point, we would hope. So I just wonder whether there also needs to be a particular awareness raising round about, say, Freshers' Weeks, that kind of thing, to make sure that young people in that category understand that they will probably have to vote by post and that they need to get into that process and use that process. Because there are several 100,000 young people probably in that category every year, and 2014, of course, will not be any different.
I think it certainly emphasises the need to have the date for when the referendum takes place as soon as possible. I think as well, an independent campaign that was making sure people were involved and would be able to use things like Freshers' Weeks. And the other thing I was going to say was around if we can get people block registered and give them, and people can have both of they still have both options. You've been block registered in halls of residence, you can vote that way. You can also postal vote using your home address. Both options are open, but I think in terms of supporting the block registration, there's a really strong argument for lots of university halls of residence being used as polling stations. And so it varies from each ERO about how often they review where their polling stations are. And I think given that this will be a very high turnout, encouraging all EROs to review where their polling stations are in the run-up to the referendum and to particularly think about this university issue would be very positive. There are some universities where they have a polling station on campus within the halls of residence, but others don't. And so that would also help, I think.
Thank you.
Stuart Milne.
Thank you, Convener. I've got a few points. First of all, I'm going to the block registration. As someone who did study away from home and stayed away from home, I maintained my registration with my home and not where I went to study. And I did that, because that's what I wanted to do. And I remain to be convinced that block registration actually would be a worthwhile exercise to undertake. Because, I mean, certainly from what I've heard this morning, up to now it's been about actually empowering young people to first of all, to register and then to vote in whichever way that they see fit. From what I've heard thus far, I think that the block registration would actually, you're actually telling people that you have to vote here, and as compared to actually empowering them for them to actually make up their own mind as to what they actually want to do. So I remain to be convinced on the idea of block registration.
I think that what I'd say to try and convince you would be around it leaves the flexibility option open. It allows you the option to vote either using your home address as you chose to do.
I'll interrupt you just for 2 seconds. I'm sorry for that.
Let Robin finish his point and you can come back at him. Robin, finish your point.
So you can keep a term time address and you can keep a home address as a student, and you're only allowed to vote in one of them. But the option is up to you, and you can remain empowered to have your home address and to register your home address yourself and to carry on voting at home. and that the block registration doesn't get in the way of that.
Yeah, but surely the choice should be up to the individual voter as to where they actually want to vote, as compared to being told, or being told, well, without term time, if you're going to vote, then potentially this is where you actually have to vote.
But if you want to keep your home address, you still have that choice to keep your home address. It doesn't get.
Well, I understand that, but
you couldn't have 2 term time addresses. But
I think we can continue this discussion at some other time.
Might be, yeah.
Okay. The other points are just regarding also there are some young people who will not be in school or in college or university. Also, folk who are working or doing apprenticeships. How do you see yourselves actually working to encourage these younger people to actually register and also participate? Do you see a role for likes of Skills Development Scotland, particularly when it's folk who have got apprenticeships? Do you see a role for them to actually get involved, and for yourselves to maybe try and work with them to encourage greater registration?
Yeah, I mean, it's always one of the challenges, and I think that's one of the things that we have to sort of get straight away, is that one of the challenges is always engaging with young people who are out in work or in apprenticeships or not in education, employment or training at all. I mean, obviously as an organisation, it's one of the things that we've worked on is trying to engage with those young people, and I think we're fairly successful in doing it, but it is going to take probably a little bit more effort and a bit of thinking about engaging people like Skills Development Scotland and people who have contact with these young people. Also, I think youth work services and you know, those sort of non-formal education outside of school, where some of these young people are often involved in those at all. It is one of the challenges. It's one of the things that I think requires a bit more thinking between yourselves, ourselves, and also the other groups like Skills Development and people like that who might be able to help us in reaching these young people.
I think also there's, again, the point to be made about using the internet. It's so widely accessible, and I just think it's something to really hammer home.
Supplementary, no?
Interested in the debate between Robin and Stuart on this issue of block registration, and it was just to ask Robin if we know for our universities what proportion of away from home students reside in halls of residence and how many are in accommodation elsewhere. Does anyone have that information?
I could see if we could get that information
to you. It might be helpful to the committee.
It would vary very wildly indeed as well between different kinds of universities. Some universities have a very halls of residence type, like St Andrews. Some, like the University of Western Scotland, have people living at home and perhaps working part-time, studying part-time, that kind of thing. So, and then we've not even got into talking about colleges in that situation where everyone would stay at home. I think there's still a really important role for universities and colleges essentially as community hubs. They are at the centre of the communities around them, and the same positives come from using them that come from using schools as polling stations.
Stuart, I need one final question.
Thank you, Convener. Just it's regarding like 15-year-olds and encouraging 15-year-olds to register. And would you foresee any challenges using what Andrew was talking about earlier on regarding the rolling kind of registration and kind of utilising that a bit more? Would you see any particular challenges whereby if that was actually further utilised, that if there was a household and the parents in the household actually weren't minded to register or to vote, but actually the 15-year-old actually did want to do so, would you see any potential challenges that could maybe cause any conflict within that particular household if there was a great deal of emphasis placed upon actually encouraging 15-year-olds to register?
I'm not sure particularly. I think there are challenges in getting 15-year-olds. When we get to rolling registration, anyway, one of the good things about 15-year-olds is that they almost all tend to be in sort of formal education in schools and things. One of the good things for us. One of the less good things, I suppose, is that when you get down to 15-year-olds, you will have classes of 15-year-olds mixed in, 15-year-olds who will be 16, mixed in with young people who are 15 and will not be 16 by the date of the referendum. One of the challenges is probably just making sure that whoever is doing it, whether it's teachers or ERAOs who are in, are sort of clear and making sure that one of the things we definitely don't want is young people trying to register are thinking that they're able to register and vote when it turns out they're not. I'm not sure whether that answers the question or whether there was something else. But that's one of the challenges that I see, but also there's a great opportunity for rolling registration there.
I think you can do it through schools, and then I would just highlight those who perhaps aren't in such stable circumstances. So I think encouragement to EROs in terms of working with those kind of organisations that work with vulnerable young people and people in care and so on. I think that homeless people, that would be important too.
It's helpful, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any indication from any of my colleagues that they want to ask any more questions. So can I thank David, Robin, Emily and Andrew for coming along and giving us such good evidence this morning. I think you've given us a fair bit to consider and think about. I thought the evidence session was very, very valuable to us and we're very grateful. There are two things certainly in terms of the bill specifically which I've noted down, which I think you've given to us, the whole issue of the electoral registration officials and whether or not they should be empowered through the statute, which has been raised with us before, but I'm glad you put that back on the record, and also the issue about the design of the registration forum, which are issues specifically to do with the bill. So I'm very, very grateful for that. But obviously the wider things you brought to us are very much to the fore of what we need to think about. So thank you very much for fantastic evidence.
Thanks.
And we're going to suspend for 5 minutes just to change over and have a comfort break. Thank you. Start again. Okay, thank you very much. Well, welcome back, committee, to the second session of this morning's evidence taking on the franchise bill. We now are taking evidence from Tam Bailey, Scotland's Commissioner for Children and Young People, and from Ken MacDonald, who is the Assistant Commissioner, Scotland Northern Ireland Information Commissioner's Office. Obviously different from that, from the Freedom of Information Office in Scotland. So we're very grateful to you, gentlemen, for coming along, giving us evidence today. I know that it's not a question I can ask Ken MacDonald in his role in terms of the data issues, because you're more interested in issues to do with fairness and lawfulness and not in policy intent. But I think it still, to get on the record, it would be useful to hear from Mr Bailey, Tam, about what you think about the principle of votes at 16 and 17 before we widen the session out to other questions.
Okay. I'm in agreement with the principle of young people aged 16, 17 voting. I'm in public record as having said that. And in fact, I would go beyond that and say that whilst the consideration of the committee and the current bill is specifically for the referendum, that we should give serious consideration to going beyond that. But I know that's not within the scope of the committee as it stands. And the reason for that is because I strongly believe in the participation and the voice of children and young people. And in fact, I've shaped my office since I've been Children's Commissioner around listening to the voices of children and young people, because I think that they have the same wisdom as many adults. So yeah, I heartily support 16, 17-year-olds getting a vote in the referendum.
Anybody else want to raise a question on that before I move on to Stuart Maxwell on issues? I think you talked about child protection issues, Stuart.
Oh, thank you, Conor. I just wanted to ask the panel what their views were on the child protection issues. Clearly, there has been somewhat a bit of a debate around 16 and 17-year-olds voting, more to do with the registration process, particularly with 15-year-olds. And I wondered whether you thought that the bill struck the right balance in terms of ensuring we get proper registration, but also making sure that children were properly protected. Tam.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think the proposal to have a separate register for young voters is good. I think that goes some way to achieving that. I know there are some quite technical issues about young people who may be vulnerable not having to disclose their address, but I think some of the provisions in the bill actually take care of that. And in fact, there's even the opportunity of being anonymous as part of the list, although I'm not quite sure whether the provisions or the criteria for anonymity actually take account of children who may be in care establishments or foster placements. And if they do, then that will achieve that. The key thing in all of this, though, is about making sure that children and young people are aware of their voting rights at 16, 17, and in particular any professionals that are around those children and young people, because they're going to rely heavily, particularly the more vulnerable young people, they're going to have to rely quite heavily on the guidance, the support of those professionals or carers who are around them. So there needs to be, I know there's been quite a lot of consideration given to increasing the awareness in the run-up to the referendum, but that's going to be particularly important to try and get to those children and young people, or young people who are most vulnerable. And there is a balance to be struck in terms of ensuring that all young people aged 16 and 17 get the vote, but also in protecting the identity or even address of where some of those young people might be. I think some of that, I actually think the provisions achieve that. The one thing I would draw attention to, though, is that if I understand it correctly, there's an intention to mark on the register those young people who are 16, 17-year-olds. I know it's not part of this bill, but you'll be considering that later. And I think that has to be, and that's for purposes of turnout, for purposes of some of the interest that people will have in the analysis of who are the 16, 17-year-olds that are voting. And I think there needs to be some care taken about whether that's publicly available or not.
Well, I'm not aware of whether that is the case in terms of people being marked, individually tagged or marked in registration. I don't know that that is the case. But
if that's not the case, then I'm
sure
even that part of it is I'm pleased about that.
Okay.
Thanks. We did respond to a previous consultation by the government on their original draft of the bill, and I think they've made significant changes since that to enhance the privacy of the vulnerable children, and certainly we support the way that it's been drafted now. I share Tam's concerns about the anonymous registration and where that fits in, and the declaration of local connection, which is another option to allow them to register but not disclose where they're staying. I think in terms of the anonymous registration, it's limited at the moment to particular restrictions as per the Representation of the People's Act. But what I would suggest is that it should be a compulsory element where a non-disclosure order is in force. One of the issues that we've come across in our regulatory capacity is often the breaches of non-disclosure orders, often accidentally, and I think this is a risk that we have to take acknowledgement of, and maybe we should strengthen the bill in that way.
Okay, thank you. I was interested in both the panel's members' comments on particularly vulnerable children, those in residential care, those where non-disclosure orders are in place. I'm just wondering if we could explore that a little bit more. I mean, effectively, do you have genuine concerns that the bill doesn't match the needs of young people in those situations? Or is it the case that there's further explanation required in how the rules as laid out will need to be interpreted?
I've probably got two points on this. I think the bill is probably strong enough, but I would ask you to consider that element regarding the non-disclosure element orders because of our previous experience, as I said. I think, though, there's also a need in terms of the canvassing form to be a bit more clear that there are these options for these young people. The way that I'm reading it, I certainly haven't picked up that there's any information there about the opportunities for declaration of local connection or for anonymous registration. And part of the fairness of processing, which is an integral part of the Data Protection Act, that really should be upfront so that they're aware, or the householder who's completing the form is aware of that.
I think that's correct. I just had a quick glance at it. I had read it before, but a quick glance at it again, and I think you're correct, Mr MacDonald. It doesn't refer to that on the actual forum, but we're not aware whether or not there might be supplementary information provided along with the forum.
There may well be, and obviously we've yet to see that. But again, I think for the purpose of the fairness of processing and taking into consideration the vulnerability of some of these young people, that it would only be right to again have it on the form so that at the point of completing the form, it's there and that option is at least can be considered.
Do you have anything to add in this area, Tom?
No, I mean
that's fine.
I mean, other than it's important that the people around the vulnerable, particularly vulnerable young people, are aware of the ins and outs that we just discussed there, and that's going to take a fair bit of awareness raising, and there needs to be careful thought given as to how you actually make sure that that is the case.
I presume you're talking about effectively staff within residential care units, foster parents.
Yeah.
That kind of. Yeah. Okay. Can I just one final question, Kevin, if you don't mind? I just wanted to particularly ask about young people who are perhaps with one parent, usually the mother, who have suffered from domestic violence and who has left the home and is in some sort of not residential care, but effectively in a unit or in somewhere else, who effectively there is an attempt to try and protect them from a violent partner. Do you think there's again enough care has been taken to ensure that we have the right balance between making sure that those young people are able to take part in this process, but also ensuring their anonymity is protected in that specific case?
I think the provisions are there because, and certainly my understanding of it is that they could make their local connection, which will, link them to their parents' address, for example, or they can go for the anonymous registration. And even if they're not subject to a non-disclosure order, they would still be able to get a certificate from a social worker to say that it would be appropriate for them to be granted anonymous registration.
Do you think it's sufficient protection?
I think it probably is, yes.
Okay. Just one point to add to that. These are young people that may be very mobile. They might be moving from address to address. That is going to be a general issue about where to register, where they might be at the point of registration, as opposed to the point where whatever time in the vote is. And that is going to be an issue that's not going to be that easy to sort out in our bureaucratic processes. So I think the intention should be that all young people, 16, 17, including the most vulnerable, but they not only come with issues around disclosure, but they come with issues often around movement or placement.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Annabelle?
Thanks, Convener. No, it's just like Stuart squinting at the actual registration form, and you're correct. I don't see anything to alert the person filling in this form that there may be qualifying criteria for young people where there are sensitive issues. The point I wanted to ask about was actually just looking at section 9. That's the register of young voters not to be published. But naturally there is a provision for the register or an entry, and it may be disclosed to a person for the purposes of an independence referendum, but only according to the Act of this Parliament by virtue of which the referendum is to be held. I mean, does that provision present you with any concerns, given that I imagine campaigning groups may be out with canvas cards and knocking on doors and asking if people are in, and whether they mean to share information or not, they might very well end up sharing information?
My understanding is that the campaign groups will only be provided with a complete register, a combined register of the usual electoral registration that the over 18s have, and the register of young electors. And there would be no way to discriminate between who was 16, 17 and those who were above 18. And on that basis, there's a security built in. I think, if I recall correctly, in the original draft bill that the government had put out for pre-consultation, there was a provision, or there was a question about disclosing the register of young electors to interested parties such as the official, and it was the official campaign groups. And I'm pleased to say that as I understand it, they've withdrawn that now, and it's a joint register.
Dates of birth are excluded. So you're satisfied there are no residual issues of concern in there?
Yeah, I'm satisfied, but maybe going back to something that Tam raised, which was, and again, it doesn't appear to be in the bill as it is the matter of counting and estimates of turnout and so forth, where there are issues, again, which we raised with the Scottish Government, because they had to make markers against, there was going to be a disclosure of the young electors at the point of the ballot, and they would have to be making markers there. Now that, again, it seems to be withdrawn.
That's withdrawn, that's fine.
But it may well be something that's going to be considered at a later date, because there will be an interest in what level of turnout there's been from young voters.
At that stage, when it becomes available, when the vote's actually taken place, and if there was a marker, all these people at that stage would then be 16 and 17. They wouldn't be under 16. So can you explain to me a bit more about where the issue would be there, if that was to be the case?
Well, we're recognising that some of these people would be still vulnerable. The fact that they've changed their age, they're still in a very vulnerable situation, and some may not be as mature as we would normally expect because of that experience. And they should be afforded a degree of protection.
Is it all children at 16 or 17, or just the ones who've already identified themselves as being vulnerable you're talking about?
My understanding is that's why you're going to have a separate register for young voters. So if that then becomes part of the publicly available register post-election, it's available for a 12-month period, I think, then that kind of defeats the purpose if you're already putting flags next to the 16, 17-year-olds, which you previously kept as a separate register of young voters. I understand the interest, and we want to be able to actually...
I suspect we'll get evidence from others later, which will be about having to have more information available for also, particularly the Electoral Commission, I suspect. So I'm just trying to make sure we tease everyone out here before we get to the Electoral Commission's evidence, because they might be in a slightly different perspective. Okay, any other questions in this area on the child protection or any other wider issues before? Can I ask a general question then in terms of the bill, because you've heard this morning some of the evidence put forward by, fantastic evidence put forward by the young people. Are there any comments you want to make in what you heard, or are there any other areas you think that the bill needs to be strengthened in that we should know about?
Yep. Two, I want to re-emphasise this business of how do we make children or young people aware of this. And I know that you posed a question to the organisation specifically here. The one thing that gets every 15-year-old out of bed in the morning is going to some form of education. And I think that in terms of raising awareness, there's an excellent opportunity. Now, I would raise awareness of the process, of the right to vote, which is quite different from the politicising of the debate. It's inevitable that lots and lots of school establishments, lots and lots of education establishments will do mock elections, will have mock referenda. We don't have a national curriculum in Scotland, but for me this fits perfectly with lots of the things that are under curriculum for excellence. Active citizens, confident individuals, effective contributors and successful learners. Now, this is about democracy in action, and actually I think this is a very rich area that you could be encouraging through Education Scotland, through the provision of education. So there's a great opportunity here to actually utilise the referendum as a focal point. Not, I'd say you need to be very careful about the politicising of it, but actually about the whole referendum process and 16, 17-year-olds' place within that. And if the government are serious, then they could actually look towards that to the raising awareness. The second thing I would pick up from this morning is the points that were made about rolling registration. I think actually that what we've talked about has been in terms of the household census and the household registration process. But rolling registration might lend itself to part of that process of raising awareness through schools. We assist young people in terms of their university applications through schools, because that's where they go. That's where you can actually get to children and young people. And if we're serious about raising their awareness, this is a way and a method of being able to do that. And you might want to think much more seriously about some of the suggestions that were made about the rolling registration, which in all honesty I hadn't actually thought through before hearing this morning, but I think there's something in there about how we would get to children or get to young people as the process of registration, which actually heightens awareness on the referendum without running the risk of politicising and it then becoming, you know, you want to make sure they're aware of it, but not that you use them as captive audiences for the politicising of it. So.
Patrick?
Thank you. Just to explore some of the issues around schools that Tam Bailey raised. We've heard in the last session some discussion around not just the awareness raising, but the promotion of participation. And obviously the Electoral Commission has a role in that on a neutral basis. The campaigns and political parties will be wanting to promote participation on a partial basis, promoting people to vote yes or to vote no. And there'll be young people as well in schools, 16 and 17-year-olds, who themselves are campaigners and activists on both sides. Could I ask what you feel about a duty for local authorities to promote participation or to work with the Electoral Commission to promote participation, and what kind of activities in schools would be appropriate and what would cross the line into inappropriate campaigning?
Okay. not on the referendum. Generally, I would support a duty to participate. And in fact, we've got a Children and Young People's Bill, which is in the process of being put together by the government. And I'm pressing very hard to make sure that some of the articles or some of the UNCRC actually is included in that. And participatory approaches is a thing which is central to that. But that's quite different from the political debating in terms of what side of the argument they would fall in terms of the referendum. So absolutely about participation, but I would just be quite careful, and especially as I'm saying that I think there's a responsibility in the government here to make sure that that people's awareness is heightened, and well, people know the government's view in terms of the debate. But that doesn't take away the responsibility of making sure that we get to all of the children and young people. And I think the registration process and some of the promotion that can be done on this through Education Scotland, for instance, would be very productive, not just for the referendum, but in future as well, about how well we listen to the views of children and young people, how trusting we are of their judgment. And I've already said, and you can get to them, that's the other thing. Because I did an exercise called a right blether, where the ambition was to get to as many children and young people in Scotland. Now, from the very small office that I operate, with 13, 14 staff, we managed to poll the views of 74,059 children and young people. That's more than 1 in 10. Now, you mentioned earlier, Patrick, about ambitions for how many young people we can encourage to be part of the referendum. I think we can get to 100,000 in terms of their awareness of it. Whether that converts into their engagement with it is another matter. And so I would place that firmly in the positioning of the government. Well done. And 16, 17-year-olds been given the vote. Now the bit is to make sure they all know about it, and that we use every structure, every engagement with children and young people that we can. And education is a very powerful one, as well as some of the organisations that were represented here this morning.
But I do just want to tease out from you a little bit about the kind of activities that you would support in schools. I mean, if schools are going to have the confidence to know that they are allowed to do anything in this area, and that might be inviting people in on a neutral, panel basis to do Q&A sessions. It might be encouraging discussion in classes. If they're going to have the confidence to know what they can do, there needs to be some kind of agreed set of rules about what's appropriate and what's not. And I'm just wondering where the balance lies for you. What would for you represent crossing the line into something that's not appropriate, and what kind of activity do you want to see happening in schools?
Schools do this now in any case.
Some do.
Okay. Sorry, I mean, I've lost count of the number of schools that I visit, and around election times, there are many of them. I don't think anybody's got an overview, right? But many of them will host mock elections from within the school. You heard lots of discussion today about peer education. So they're not inviting all sides in terms of the hustings to participate. What they do is generate activity from within the school population and people stimulating debate on either side. That happens in any case right now.
Some schools go further and they do have hustings with candidates at election times. Others feel that they're not allowed to do that. In fact, they are allowed to. I'm just wondering whether you feel that that's appropriate to give young people the opportunity to question the campaigns in a controlled, unbiased, neutral...
I would be careful of politicising it too much, but I'm all for the raising awareness of the debate. And I think that will happen in any case. That could be one of the considerations as you produce the material, if that's the intention, through Education Scotland. It has to be absolutely political neutral, and it has to be clearly so. That's a difficult balance for the government, who I'm saying have got the responsibility of making sure that that happens in terms of stimulating of that type of activity within our education.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else want to raise any other points? Ken, do you anything else? I know Tam responded to my question, but was anything else you needed to put on the record?
Yeah, I'm afraid I couldn't attend the first session, so I've got no comment on what was said there. two issues, though. One is the point of the retention of the register. Again, in the consultation the Scottish Government undertook, there was provisions for it to be deleted, to be destroyed after a year, the copies that were being held by the EROs. Copies held by the official campaigns could have been retained. And we argued that that shouldn't be the case, that if they're going to be destroyed by the EROs, they should be destroyed by the campaigns because there was no need for them to hold, which is a provision of the Data Protection Act. I haven't seen anything in the legislation as has been provided or in the explanatory notes that refers to the retention of the register and its consequential deletion. It may well be in other legislation in the Representation of the People's Act, but I think you should reassure yourselves that it will be destroyed after an appropriate period. The other point I'd make is probably not one of data protection, or certainly limited in terms of data protection principles, but just to draw your attention to the service declarations, where I see that there will be provision for people who are in the armed forces and abroad, or their spouses are, their partners are, can make a service declaration, but it doesn't appear that it's extended to the children of the young people that are still living with their parents who are within these categories that can claim the service declaration. And so they would be disenfranchised in the way that I'm reading it. So I'd suggest that you maybe examine that.
Have you seen the policy memorandum in regard to, I think the policy memorandum?
The policy memorandum, yes.
Refers to that.
The explanatory notes refer to it on page 7 in paragraph 32, but it only refers to the jobs of their spouses or their civil partners. And there will be young people who live with their parents and should therefore, I think, be included.
That's a very interesting point, and it's something that actually I had thought about this morning when I was preparing for committee, and certainly something I intend to look into, because I think in an earlier paper helpfully prepared by the clerks for the committee, when we looked at the armed forces and the fact, of course, notwithstanding what some of us may have read in the papers yesterday, they will of course be subject to the procedure that has been in place for many years, which is to make a service declaration in addition to the possibility that they could have been ordinarily resident voters. But I think in an earlier paper from the clerks or Spice, there was reference to the children of armed forces who were reaching the relevant age threshold. And as I say, when I read this in preparation for the committee, it wasn't quite as clear cut. So I think it's a fair point that Dr MacDonald makes, and I think one we should look into further.
I agree. Yep. Anything else, Ken?
That's fine, thanks.
Okay, if there's no other points, then thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming and giving us evidence. It's very helpful. And obviously I've been scribbling certainly some of the things you've been saying here that we need to take forward and consider further. I'm sure my colleagues have been doing the same, so thank you very much. Just before we come to the end of the meeting, just a couple of things for us to remember. Written submissions to the committee's call for evidence will be posted on the committee's web page when they come in. The clerks will provide us with hard copies which will be circulated to members after the first deadline on the 21st of March, so we can all have a folder full of that. When the franchise bill was published, it was distributed to all members of the committee, and I'm aware, certainly from talking to some of my colleagues, that some of the people didn't get it in the way that others got it, and therefore I think you need to remind document supply about where you want copies of bills sent to in that regard.
Can I just say, it seemed to me that it was those of us who don't get the business bulletin delivered in hard copy but agree to take it, to look for it ourselves electronically, didn't get the bill because it was sent out with the business bulletin.
But you can still tell document supply that you want bills specifically sent to you, hard copies if you wish, to your desk. So I'm just advising
I would think as members of the committee it should automatically happen, I have to say.
No, I'm just telling you what the process is. And
well, sorry, I'm not arguing with that, but I do think, convener, that when you're a member of a committee and it's a bill directly relevant to the committee...
Listen, can we come back to that at the end of the discussion?
Yeah, because I don't want every bill landing in my desk in hard copy. I just want the ones that are
Got your
relevant to me.
point. We'll deal with that. We'll deal with that. Got your point.
Thank you for
Understand that. Understand that. Right. Can we formally close the meeting with these little bits of the over, and I'll just have another quick chat about other things. Thanks very much.